Okay, welcome everyone. It is so nice to see so many faces, and especially on tonight, which is a very special day. Today is Chaf Beis Shvat, which is the yahrzeit of the Rebbe's wife, the Rebbetzin Chaim Moshka. So it's an auspicious time to talk about her, to talk about what we can learn from this week's Torah portion. In fact, the day after, even like this whole week, really, you could speak about this holy soul and what we can learn from her. And I want to devote a little bit of our time. We'll talk about the Parsha, and we'll also talk about how that fits in with this special day, especially because everything in Judaism is related. So if we have the Rebbetzins yahrzeit on this week, in this week's Parsha, which is Parshas Mishpatim, there's a relation to it, and we'll talk about that. I also want to talk a little about, Chani just came back from the conference of Shluchos. There was over 4,000 women, young women, all different age women who are in tremendous leadership roles. And it's done every single year. Every year it grows tremendously. And it was done specifically for this weekend of Chaf Beis Shvat to coincide with the Rebbetzins yahrzeit. And I was asked by somebody that it's interesting to see that the Rebbetzin was such a private individual. And we're going to go through some story. We'll talk a little bit about the Rebbetzin in her life. But they said she's such a private individual. She hated the limelight. She was always running from the limelight. And yet, isn't it a little ironic that here you have a conference of 4,000 leaders who are out there, really public individuals, public figures, lead in tremendous leadership roles. How does that fit in, and how do they get their inspiration from the Rebbetzin? So I want to talk a little, good question? I want to talk a little about that as well. So let's talk about this week's Torah portion. Starts with Parshas, it's called Parshas Mishpatim. The word Mishpatim means? It means? That's mishpacha. It means? Judgments, laws. These are different laws. And it starts off with Ve'ela hamishpatim asher tasim lifnehem. These are the laws that you should put in front of them, that you should teach the children of Israel. And the word va'ela, and these are, is connecting it. So it's connecting it, right? The vav means and it's always vav hachibur, the vav that connects. It connects to the previous parsha, which is the parsha that some of you weren't here last week, but that was the parsha where we spoke about the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. The tremendous event of the giving of the Torah, the most awesome event in history, where God actually descended on Mount Sinai and communicated with us, with human beings, where physical and spiritual kissed, they touched each other, they became connected in a way that was never permitted to be connected. And from there on in, there is this connection. So that is why before Matan Torah, before the giving of the Torah, things didn't stay holy. But after Matan Torah, things are holy, like physical objects are holy. Like we take a siddur and we kiss it, we take a Torah and we kiss it. The Torah is made out of an animal, it's made from the animal skins. And yet the Torah, it becomes a holy object. Before the Torah was given, things did not stay holy. Things that were holy was in the spiritual. Physical is just physical. There's this divide between the spiritual and the physical. And you could not make something physical holy, just like you couldn't make something spiritual physical. And that became completely, that law of spiritual and physical staying separate, the heavens staying in the heavens and the earth staying in the earth, completely merged as the two came together, as God descended on Mount Sinai and Moses went up to receive the Torah. So this was the most awesome, awe-inspiring event in history ever. And we spoke about the Jewish people receiving the Torah and how it was just incredible, the kind of feeling. They actually felt godliness. It was physically sensed with their eyes, with their ears. They could actually sense clarity. It was so clear to them what truth and what holiness was. So following that Torah portion, we would assume that the following Torah portion of Mishpatim would somehow continue on in that theme of just like, wow, the thunder, the lightning, the awe-inspiring spirituality was being felt. And we start off with laws, simple laws. Laws of if you have a servant, how you need to treat him, right? And remember this, how did a person have a servant? In Judaism, what does it mean that a person was a servant? Judaism had a very fair way of doing things. What happened was, suppose a person stole or they committed some kind of crime and they had no way of paying it back. What could they do? They could actually, instead of killing them, instead of imprisoning them, we actually want to make them functional human beings. So what could they do? They could sell themselves as a slave for a certain prescribed period of time. And then during this time period, which is a 7-year time period, after 7 years of Shemitah, a person goes free. But during this time period, they are paying back what they owe. So Judaism then goes on to say how you need to treat this slave. So this person who has committed a crime, who is kind of a lowly level person, who is on the bottom of the spectrum of society, the Torah is worried, though, how you treat him. And in Judaism, when you if you acquire a servant, it's like you acquired a master. Because if you have only one pillow, guess who gets the pillow? The servant. Okay, so it's not even like you can for sure not mistreat the servant, but how you need to treat him extremely respectfully and with a tremendous amount of human dignity. So this is the rules that the Torah is starting off with, specific rules of how to treat a servant, how to, if you borrow something, all these various laws and rules that are very physical and down to earth. And the question is like, whoa, we go from the giving of the Torah, this awe-inspiring event, to real practicality. But if you liken it to a wedding, I remember when my daughter called me soon after she got married. And it was, Ma, how long do you boil an egg for? No clue. Okay. Or how long does the chicken have to be in the oven for? How long do I do the fish for? Or how do you get stains out of clothing? Something that she hadn't been at all interested in before suddenly became a reality to her. And that's kind of what this week's Torah portion is. Torah is telling us that Torah is not in the heavens. It's not something spiritual. It's not far away. Of course, it's that too. But we take the spirituality and we apply it to real life. Now we're going to real life. We had the awesome experience of communicating with God, communicating with our Creator, communicating with the infinite, feeling that infinitude. And what comes next? How to treat somebody. How to treat not only somebody, how to treat your slave. How to treat him in an appropriate way, how to do various specific laws, how to do them, what to do in your day-to-day life, because that is really what Torah is about. That's the beauty of Judaism. It's not something that you take and you go meditate on this mountain, away from physicality, from materiality, where you're spiritual and you're just worried about yourself and your own self-growth. No. Torah is about interacting with others. Torah is about living here in this world and creating a home for God in this world. So creating physicality, using materiality, and elevating it, making it into something godly. That's the lesson of Mishpatim, and that's why it begins with Va'ela, with that connecting thread. Just like the 10 Commandments that we just spoke about, the 10 Commandments, which is, I am God, your God, don't believe in any other things other than God, etc., all the rest of them. Now we're translating that. What does that mean? Basic laws, simple laws of how you live your life. Interestingly as well, we know that there's 3 different kinds of laws in Torah. We have Mishpatim, which is one kind of law, but we also have Chukim and Eidos, right?
Could you say that again?
Chukim, a chok, and Eidos. So a chok is the kind of law that we completely have no understanding of. We don't understand why. For example, don't wear wool and linen together. Now we can have a taste of it, like we know that the different energies of wool and linen don't combine together, and therefore we can't, but we don't really understand why. Certain animals are kosher, certain animals are not.
I actually read somewhere where I think the source of that, of the wool and linen, and it's just totally, it could be part of the reason, but it actually, it would remind Hashem of the sacrifice of Cain, the bad one, right? Yeah. And because it was wool and linen in there, and because it would remind, that's why we don't wear.
Interesting.
Later I read it, I don't remember, but
Interesting.
Yeah.
It sounds familiar.
So there's definitely like some explanations in what we call ta'ameh mitzvah, which means like it's a taste of the mitzvah. You get a taste, a little feel of why we do it, but we can't really understand it because we can't fathom the mind of God. This is talking about chukim are really the mind of God, and we cannot understand or comprehend ever because it's infinite. But we can get a taste of it. But chukim are those laws that we would never imagine to do on our own. If we were given, if we were told lead a moral, dignified life, we would not think, don't mix wool and linen together. We would think of something like honor our parents. It makes sense. Honor your parents. Your parents gave birth to you, so they've raised you. They've held you. They've held you for so long. Now it's time for you to honor them as well. Honor the people who did that. But we wouldn't think of certain laws. Even the laws of kosher. Some of the laws of kosher, we don't understand why is some animals kosher, why are not some animals. We can again have a taste of it and understand a little bit of why, but that's not the essence of it. So chukim are laws that we do not understand. We don't have any comprehension of. We cannot understand them. We do them simply because this is the will of God, and God is saying, this is what I want from you. Eidos are those laws that we can a little bit understand them. They're more like eidos means a testimony. It's a testimony for something that we do. So, for example, the law, keeping Passover, the laws of Passover and keeping Passover as a holiday, we can understand it because we're trying to remember as a national holiday what happened to us years ago when we were freed from Egypt. So it's kind of a memory, it's a testimony to what we've done. The Shabbat, we're remembering that God stopped working on the Shabbat. So it's not things that we would think of on our own, but we can have a little glimpse of it. Mishpatim are those laws that we can very much understand. It's like it says that if we wouldn't have the laws of modesty, we would learn it from a cat. Just like a cat is modest in how they go about them, doing the things that they do, we would learn these things from others around us. We would learn the laws of every law. Every country has civic laws, has laws that we understand, that it makes sense to have a functioning community, a functioning society. You need laws like don't kill, don't murder, don't speed, okay? All these things, wear a seatbelt. All these things are laws that we can understand. So mishpatim are those laws that had we needed to think of them on our own, we could have thought of most of these laws on our own. And the majority of the laws in this week's Torah portion are those that fall into the category of mishpatim. And yet, the Torah says to us, these are the mishpatim asher tasim lifnehem, that you should put before them. And the word lifnehem, the commentaries explain in 3 different ways. What does it mean you should put these laws, these are laws that we understand, put these laws before them? My first explanation is these are the laws that you should put before them, meaning if you are judging, if you're going to court for a civic matter, don't go to a secular court of law, go to a Jewish court of law. Even if the law is the same in a secular court of law, do it in a Jewish court of law. So whenever possible, we try to go to, if it's a matter between 2 Jews, that we have a dispute, we go to what's called a Beit Din, which is a rabbinic court of law, in order to decide what is the law. If one person thinks another person wrong, then we go to the Beit Din and they decide this. So lifnehem, go before them, go do these laws in your own court of law, in the Jewish court of law. Another meaning of lifnehem is before you, means teach these laws to them in a way that they will understand them, that they will appreciate them. Like you have a table that's set. It's not just a plain table, but it's a table that's set with all the delicacies, meaning teach the laws in a way that it's full, that's something that they can understand. And the third way that it's understood, and this is the more mystical dimension, the Hasidic dimension, is from the Alter Rebbe, and he explains lifnehem is from the word pnimius, which means inwardness. Make these laws something that they understand from the inner aspects of their being, from the inner parts of their being. And the question is, we could say when it comes to chukim, make it something that they understand from the innermost of their being. We can say when it comes to eidos, make them understand it, make them feel it on a soul level. But why mishpatim? Mishpatim are so understandable. It's like we understand it. We understand honor your parents. We understand don't kill. We understand don't steal. We understand these laws because they make sense to us. Why then is Moshe told that he should put these laws in a way that they'll understand and appreciate it? And the answer is that there's different ways of doing a law. There's a way of doing a law because you understand it. And then there's doing a law because God told you to do the law. So it's easy when you're doing a law like a chok. You're doing a law that's completely incomprehensible, wearing wool and linen together. I'm obviously doing it because this is God's will, because I would never think of it on my own, right? I'm obviously eating matzah on Passover because this is what God wants of me, not because I would think of it on my own. But when we're doing a mishpat, a law that is something that we understand, this too, God is saying, do it, not only because you understand it, but do it because God is telling you to do it. So don't steal because you're a moral person. Of course you're a moral person, and don't steal because of that. But also realize that you're not stealing because this is what God wants of you. And we can liken this to, when we're in a relationship, husband and wife relationship. So there are certain things that the wife wants the husband to do, and the husband can't for the life of him understand why he has to do that, okay? I'm sure we all have examples. I know I most certainly do. Okay, one of mine is like, don't leave your coat on that dining room table. And don't leave any books on the dining room table. And for the life of him, my husband's like, it's a perfectly usable surface, Why can't I leave anything there? And my son now as well. Like, why can't I leave anything there? Like, it's so usable. Why do you need it empty?
If you see something, pick it up.
Yeah.
Really.
So there are certain things that, husbands will do just because their wife wants them to do it, even though they completely don't understand. It doesn't make any sense. Sorry?
Venus and Mars.
Venus and Mars, exactly. So they know they do it because this is what she wants me to do. And it's obvious when they're doing those laws that they're doing it because their wife wants it, because in their mind, it's completely illogical and completely incomprehensible. But then there are certain laws or certain rules in the house that make sense to them. They also want a nice house. They also want a clean house. So even if they don't like doing it, they'll do it because not only is this something that she wants to have done, but this is something that I also want in my house. I also want my house to look presentable. So even those laws, though, the Torah is saying, even those laws, do it because you want it, but also do it because this is what she wants. That's how you build a relationship. Because when you build a relationship that's from enthusiasm, from vitality, from when there's an enthusiastic way of doing it, you need to do it because you understand it, but also because this is what she wants, because I want to connect to her. Because I am married to her, I'm married to the most wonderful person in the world, and therefore I want to connect to her. And how do I connect to her? I want to connect to her by doing something that's meaningful to her. Even if I also understand it, I'm not only doing it because I understand it, I'm doing it because this is what she wants. This is something that's important to her. And that's what the Torah portion of Mishpatim is, and that's why Hasidim used to often say, we should only do chukim, we should only do with Mishpatim with as much reverence to God as we do chukim. Meaning chukim we can't even understand, so of course we're doing it because this is what God wants, but we should do mishpatim too because this is the will of God. So this is something that we learned from this week's Torah portion of Mishpatim. We learned the idea of connecting to God in a very physical way, through the practicality, through the practical aspects of life, not in the heavens, not secluded on a mountain, but actually using materiality, physicality, our daily schedule to connect and to forge this relationship, this deep relationship with God. And that's why I found that it's so interesting that this is the week of Chaf Beis Shvat, of the yahrzeit of the Rebbetzin, because I think the Rebbetzin very much epitomized living a very holy, dignified life, very much aware of what's going on around her and what's the materiality around her, though she didn't lead a materialistic life at all, but very aware of what's going on and putting godliness down to earth in all aspects of life. So I want to share with you, we don't know much about the Rebbetzin, the truth is. There's a few stories that emerged over the years. We don't know a lot because she very successfully hid herself from everyone. She really hated the limelight and never wanted to be in the limelight. She never wanted to get respect just because of who she was. And so very much she was very hidden in the sense that she shunned any kind of public role or any kind of public influence or any kind of respect that people would give her. She very much ran away from that. In fact, in one of the stories, which is very a popular story, her attendant, who was Ari Halberstam, not Ari, what's his name? Chesed Halberstam, thank you. His son was Ari. Yeah, he was an attendant in the Rebbe's house, and the Rebbe very much encouraged the Rebbetzin to go out. She was very much at home, so he would take her for an excursion. He would take her out for a drive to get some fresh air, and they would go to Long Island very often. She would walk in the parks there. Sometimes his son, who was killed, who was murdered, on the Brooklyn Bridge, Ari Halberstam. Sometimes they would pick him up and take him with, and she would like to push him in the park. She would push him on the swings. But they always would go on a certain specific route to Long Island, and he would drive her. And one time, he was driving her as usual, and the road that they usually took was closed, so he had to take a detour around a different road. He took this different road, and as they passed through this side road, there was like screaming. They heard screaming from the road, from this woman who was on the road. And the Rebbetzin said, "Could you please go back and let's see what was going on there?" So he turned the car around and went back onto the road, and he sees that there's this woman who's standing outside of her house crying and hysterical, and the marshal office is taking out all her furniture and all her stuff from her home, and the Rebbetzin tells Chesed Halberstam to go and see what's going on. Why is the woman wailing? Why is she crying? And what's going on? And he finds out that the woman is being evicted. She hadn't paid her rent for a few months, and she's being evicted from her home. So the Rebbetzin tells him, go find out how much is owing, and if they will take a personal check. And he didn't even realize what the Rebbetzin was about to be doing. So he went and asked, and the marshal said that yes, we'll take a personal check, but there was $6,700 that was owing from the woman and back rents that she hadn't paid. And if this amount is paid, yeah, we'll put her stuff back into her house. When the Rebbetzin heard this, she immediately wrote out a personal check, and it was given to the officer. But she said to Chesed, make sure you just give it and let's go. Let's drive away without anyone knowing what she had done. When they're back in the car driving away, when the woman hadn't even realized what was going on, her driver turned to her, Chesed turned to her, and he said, what was that all about? Why did you give such a large sum of money to a complete stranger who you don't even know who she was, what she was? And she answers something that is so significant. She says, my father taught me, that was the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, he taught me that when you are going somewhere in life and you see something, everything you see is hashgacha pratis, is divine providence. We usually go on a certain route. And this time, for some reason, we had to go on a different route. And it was on that detour that I noticed this woman and her situation. So I knew that if I was seeing that for a reason, there was a reason why I was seeing that, in order for me to make a difference in her life. And this is what we really see. This is what Mishpatim is really all about. We're going through life, through the physical aspects of life, living in this world. We're not living in the heavens. You see something, you're seeing it for a reason. You're seeing it in order to help somebody, in order to make a difference in somebody's life. And that really is like such a phenomenal lesson, because we're always seeing things in life. And how many of us are really, okay, we might not take out such a large sum of money, but how many of us are ready to roll up our sleeves and say, hold on, maybe I can help in some way, maybe I can make a difference. Another story that's told, this was a woman whose name was Louise Hager, who used to go to the Rebbetzin. She was like friendly with her family and knew the Rebbetzin. And she once went to the Rebbetzin, and she was talking about her mother, who was very sick at the time. She had some form of cancer, and the family was very, very nervous about the situation. And interestingly, when she went to the Rebbetzin, the Rebbetzin had done her research on her mother's condition, and this is before internet. This is before we all have our computers and we all just Google. We're all Dr. Googles, right? So this is when you really had to do research on something. The Rebbetzin knew everything about the situation that her mother was in. She had researched it. She gave her some practical advice on what she should do. And she told her something, though, that changed this woman's life. She said, think positively. Think positively, and when you are around your mother, make sure you act positively, because by acting positively, she'll be in a completely different frame of mind. And the woman said, well, by the time she went back, she lived in London, in England. By the time she went back home, she was in a completely different place of mind, full of optimism and full of the ability to think positively about the situation. And her mother did actually recover. And the same woman says that when she went to the Rebbetzin, she also said to the Rebbetzin once, the Rebbe is very into Mivtzayim, which is teaching Jews all about different aspects of Torah, teaching different mitzvahs that we're supposed to be doing. That's why you'll see sometimes in supermarkets, men will go over to men, are you Jewish? Would you like to put on tefillin? Or to women, do you have do you light Shabbos candles? Or, these boys and girls who do that. And this Louise said to the Rebbetzin, I would like to try to influence people more, but I'm a shy person, and it's hard for me. And the Rebbetzin, again, didn't try to tell her, go out and do it. But she said slowly, step by step, in the right time. She encouraged her in a step-by-step fashion, a little bit more, a little bit at a time. And in this way, again, encouraged her. I think now this woman said she's the head of some kind of cancer foundation. And in her sphere of influence, she's now able to influence a lot of people in a lot of good things in terms of Mitzrayim and in terms of a lot of other aspects of Judaism. Interestingly, I saw what I found also fascinating. We speak about Mishpatim as being the aftermath of Yisro's kind of like the wedding and the honeymoon where we're getting married to God, and Mishpatim is like the aftermath. How are the husband and wife going to relate to each other? How are we going to talk to each other? How are we going to treat each other? And so I found it also interesting how the Rebbe and Rebbetzin speak about what we can learn from them about how to interact with one another. The Rebbe once said to his doctor, Dr. Ira Weiss, he said, as important to me as putting on tefillin every day, and we know tefillin is a very holy mitzvah for men, they do it every day, this is connecting our heart and soul, our heart and our mind to God. He said, as important as putting on tefillin is to me, is spending time with my wife. And this is, again, a world leader who was busy with everyone's requests and everyone's questions, and what did he find most important? Spending the time with his wife. And the Rebbetzin in kind said about her husband that she said to a relative, I always wait up for him to come home. And the Rebbe would come home sometimes like wee hours of the morning or even later. She says, I always wait up for him in order to spend that time with him. So that's like a certain connection that we can definitely take from the marriage and apply, and the honeymoon, and apply to real life. Also fascinating I saw was that someone who was again an attendant in the Rebbe's house was asked, what does the Rebbe call the Rebbetzin? Like, does he call her Musya, Chaya Mushka, Mushka? What does he call her? And the man says, I don't know. He says, what do you mean you don't know? You've been there for so many years. What do you mean you don't know? He says, the Rebbe never called her from another room. He never called her and said, hey, Chaya, Mushka, can you get me a coffee? Never called. Or what do you think about this? And I was thinking about like how me and my husband, sometimes he's upstairs, I'm downstairs. No, of course you call to each other. Who actually physically gets up and goes to the other room? I mean, I know with kids nowadays we text them, right? It's easier to get them on the phone than actually. But the Rebbe always would physically get up. He never would call her from another room and call out to her. He would physically get up and then go to her and then address her. And I thought when I read that, like, how different would be our communication with our spouse and our family, members of our family, if we actually wouldn't, hey, did you hear it? What? And how many fights would we avoid? What'd you say? Would we avoid if we actually just physically got up and went there, which I found was so special. And again, we're not talking about young people, young, energetic people who actually went there to do it. One other story that I found.
That's really good for a college class, write that down.
Yeah, exactly. For a college class, and how much more for a class of people who are married for many years. Another thing I found very interesting, there was a Rabbi Zalman Gurari who was again close to the Rebbetzin, and there was a time when the Rebbetzin had a certain problem, a medical problem in her eye, and he took her to a doctor who was explaining to her different ways of treating it, one option, another option, and it was a pretty serious thing, and he was explaining the various options and giving her the choice of what way to proceed. And when they went back into the car, the Rebbetzin asked this Salman Gurari to please find out more about these two different methods of treatment. And he says, what do you mean? Aren't you going to ask the Rebbe? Like, we know people ask the Rebbe all kinds of treatment, all kinds of miraculous, forms. Everyone went to the Rebbe to ask him, should we do this or should we do that? And we're saved as a result of this. And she says, no, don't say anything to the Rebbe about it. I don't want to give the Rebbe pain. I don't want to give him pain in knowing that I have this condition. Don't say anything. Of course he did, because he had no idea what to respond. He's taking into responsibility the Rebbetzins' eyes. So he wrote the Rebbe a letter, and in the letter he explained what the different ways and the different options of what the doctor said, and asked the Rebbe for advice, and told the Rebbe, though, but the Rebbetzin doesn't want you to know that I'm asking you. And the Rebbe answered him which treatment he should take, exactly which one, and said to him, but make sure you don't tell the Rebbetzin that you told me, because I don't want her to be hurt be pained by the fact that she pained me. So look at that sensitivity. And we know many times, people reach the Rebbetzin to ask her, to ask the Rebbe for something, and she would wake up the Rebbe, she would ask the Rebbe for a blessing for various things. When people asked, all the time, she didn't feel that was inconveniencing him, because she felt this is what a Rebbe was for. But when it came to her own question, her own issue, she didn't want to add to the responsibility on his shoulders, to the burden on his shoulders. She didn't want to give him any kind of level of pain in doing that. So I thought that was really, really very special. Yeah. Okay, so, and one last thing. When the Rebbe had his heart attack, the doctors who were treating him were very, very concerned, and they said, we cannot treat him here. We need to take him to the hospital. And the Rebbe refused to go. He did not want to go to the hospital. And the truth is, the last few times that I've been in the hospital, I could see why. Hospital's a place where you get sick if you're not already. But the Rebbe did not want to go to the hospital. And the doctors left, new doctors came to treat him, and they didn't know what to do. And at one point, they were ready to sedate the Rebbe and take him by force to the hospital, because we have to save the Rebbe's life. But in order to do that, they needed the Rebbetzins' signature as his power of attorney. And she came down and she's like, what's going on? Very calmly. And they explained to her the situation, that we want to sedate the Rebbe in order to take him to the hospital. She says, I've never, in all the years that I've been with the Rebbe, known him to be out of control at any point in time. And if the Rebbe says he does not want to leave his office to go to the hospital, we're not doing it. And again, you can imagine, like, as a wife, your husband is in such danger, and you don't know what to do, and all the doctors are saying that, And yet she was probably the biggest chassid of the Rebbe in terms of believing in him and knowing that this is what he wants, this is what he knows what he's talking about. And instead they brought the hospital to the Rebbe. They brought all the machines, and he actually stayed in his own room and he was treated there. And that's, that was, and he recovered from that. So this is a relationship that I think we can learn a lot about in doing the inspiration of honeymoon and marriage and bringing it down to earth in the day-to-day practicalities of life. And now I just want to address that last question, which I mentioned before, about the Kinnis HaShluchos, this conference of shluchos, of women who are such doers, so much out there, so in the public life. I mean, you can see from these glimpses how very private the Rebbetzin was, how we know so little about her, and how she shunned the limelight. So how is it that we make this huge conference for over 4,000 women leaders on the day of her yahrzeit? And how do we get inspiration from the Rebbetzin? How do women who are in such leadership roles get inspiration from the Rebbetzin, who seems like such a private individual? So when I think about the Rebbetzin, I think the phrase that comes to mind that epitomizes her is a phrase that we have in Tehillim, which is Kol Kfuta Bas Melech Penima. The honor of the daughter of the king is inward. Her regality as the princess, as the daughter of a king, she was such a regal woman, such an elegant woman, but it was penima, it was inward, it was focused inward. It wasn't focused outward, it was focused very much inward. And when I think of that, and that really is a phrase that we use for the Jewish woman in general, that when we talk about tzniut, modesty, when we talk about the daughter of the king, that her role is more of an inward role. And what does that mean? Does that mean when we say that our role is a more inward role, or that a person is penima? We actually had that word when we said lifnehem, when we said that these are the mishpatim that you should bring before them. The word lifnehem is from the same word of panemius. Bring it to the innerness of their soul. So that same word of panemius, of inwardness, what does it mean to be an inward person, a panemi, a person whose focus is more inward than outward? And I think really that this is, in our generation, probably the number one challenge, because we are a generation that is so focused on externality, on what everyone else is saying, what everyone else is thinking. How many likes do I have? How many followers do I have? How many people am I an influencer? We're so focused on the externality that we sometimes forget the internality. The Rebetzin's inwardness was focused inward, not because she couldn't be a leader, not because she couldn't be out there in the limelight, but because this is what she felt was her best way of helping the Rebbe in his role, being that support system for him, not being this woman who's out there cheerleading and doing things, but this is the best way that she could help him in the fundamental role that he was given as the leader of our generation. When a person is focused on inwardness, it allows a person to have confidence, to do what they need to be doing, to have the self-esteem to do whatever they need to be doing, whether that be a role outside in the public or whether that be a role inside. When you're not looking at others for recognition, when you're not looking to others for the accolades, for the yay, for the applause, you're ready to focus on what's the best thing for my situation, what's the best thing that I need to be doing. And that can sometimes be a role that's outwards, that's public. That can sometimes be a role that's inwards. Because your inwardness, your morals, your boundaries, your self-esteem, your morals, and what's leading your life is not what everyone else is going to say. What leads you to your decisions, what channels those decisions, is this internalness where you're so in touch with yourself, with who you are, with what your family needs, with those around you, that you don't care what everyone's doing. So I don't need everyone else to say, oh, you're so great, you're such a good ... You're such a good business person, you're such a good leader, you're such a good mother. I don't need other people to say that. I have my self-worth from within. The parameters of my life, the boundaries of my life, are not delineated by what everyone else is saying. So my choices are not influenced by others. They're influenced by my inner principles and my inner morals. And that allows me to take a position of whatever is best for me and my situation and my family at this present time. whether it be a public role, whether it be a private role, whatever it is, as long as I am not being influenced by the outside world to take on whatever role the outside world feels is important, that's not where my value lies. And we have a similar understanding when the angels came to Avraham said, they asked, where's Sarah? Where's Sarah? And he says, Hine ba'ayel, she's in the tent. And it didn't only mean she's in the tent physically. He meant her role is she's in the tent, she's in her home. And we know that Sarah was right out there with Avram. She was converting the women just as he was converting the men. They were on this mission to spread monotheism to the world. What does it mean? Hine ba'ayel, she's this inward woman hiding in the tent. But again, it means her role was not dependent on what other people think. Her role was in the tent. She's a safeguarded place for her family where there's parameters, there's boundaries that are so strong in terms of her moral sense of her moral GPS of how to journey through this world. Her journey through this world was not dependent on what everyone else is going to be saying. It was very much her own inwardness, her own ayhel, her own tent of morals and of understanding of what is my goal and my purpose here in this world. What is my purpose and mission? So when a person sees this example of a woman who's not involved in externality, but is very much involved in internality, in innerness, in pneumius, whose role is not dependent on what others think of her, but she's strong enough in her self-esteem and in her self-knowledge of herself and her principles of herself that she's not looking to others for those accolades. That is when you can do anything. You can go out, you can go in, it doesn't matter. Whatever it is that whatever qualities and talents you have, you can use them for your mission in life. And I would say that today's young leadership of those 4,000 plus women who were at this conference are able to go out there because they value this inwardness. So they're out there without compromising their ohel, their own personal boundaries, their own personal morals, their own understanding of what God wants of me in this world is not being shifted by how the wind blows today and tomorrow. It's not being influenced by how society goes. And when a person has that strength and has that backbone, that is the greatest strength that we can have. That is the greatest strength, that we're not focused on the externalities of the world as so much of society is, but we're focused on the pneumius, the inwardness of what does God want of me. And when a person is focused on that and his principles and morals are so strong, that is when you can accomplish anything. That is when you can go out to the four corners of the world and be the only Jewish person there, the only religious person there, and still stay true to your values and educate your family in staying true to your values, because you're not involved with the externality, but you're very much true to the innerness, the pneumius of what does God want of me. Okay, so that is what this week's Torah portion is all about. And now for our discussion. Let's talk about how we can, there's a lot of externality in the world. There's a lot of external pressure that we all face from outside influences. How can we each create that safeguard, that safeguarded ohel, that safeguarded home for ourselves, those parameters, those boundaries for ourselves? How can we create that in our own lives so that we aren't concerned about what this one says or that one says, or the externalities of the world, how the different ways that the wind blows into today's society? Let's talk a little about that.